So since I started playing Medieval, I've had the opportunity to experience each new episode as it's released over the course of this past year or so, and I can safely say that the prospect of each new release always generated a serious level of excitement within me, because one of the key pillars of a Medieval is that each realm within this game is thoroughly unique. Each of these places has its own distinct look, its own unique roster of enemies, its own particular sense of atmosphere, which is certainly helped along immeasurably by the likes of Andrew Hulshult, who once again takes on soundtrack duties. He was also present for Dusk, he's also here in a Medieval, and once again, he is doing sterling work. But for the purposes of this review, rather than going off my simple memory of what these episodes were like to experience as and when they released, I thought it'd be a much better idea to re-experience the entirety of a Medieval as a whole from front to back and see what the whole hog feels like in a single unbroken chain. And as it turned out, I spent a nigh on unbroken 8 hours playing through a Medieval. The length of that was probably exacerbated somewhat by my inability to effectively quick save when I actually needed to, but nonetheless, it's rare these days that I actually find a game that has me comfortable with the prospect of such a long-haul playthrough, but once again, I think that speaks very well of the variety and the unique nature of the realms that you'll be fighting through during the course of a Medieval. You'll go from the realm of those who worship the moon to a realm of those that prize order and logic, only to discover that they've fallen afoul of a blight that seems to resemble that of a tentacle chaos god nature. There's a realm of forges and machinery and mechanical death traps. There's a realm of those who worship the sun. But if there's one thing that certainly impresses me about all of these when put side by side, it's the fact that they still feel unique, but they don't feel disparate. They don't feel like you're experiencing the equivalent of whiplash when moving from one realm to the next. And I think that is credit to the unifying nature of the setup behind a Medieval. You are a champion sent in to liberate the realms from the influence of evil, which they've unfortunately fallen afoul of, and ultimately defeat the big bad at the end. Spoilers, by the way, if you didn't think that was how it was gonna go. Another element that certainly aids a Medieval when it comes to the relatively smooth transition from realm to realm is the fact that its architecture is fairly distinct. If I had to sum it up in a nutshell, I would describe it as satisfyingly angular. You get a sense that despite these realms looking very different, feeling very different, they are still hewn from the same stone. It's just that it's been repurposed for very, very different ends. If there was one aspect of a Medieval, however, where I wasn't sure how it would hold up for the duration of the game front to back, it would be the roster of weapons that you have at your disposal. Now, my reasoning behind this thought process is largely down to the fact that by the end of episode 2, you will have been able to acquire everything in the armory, from the Azure Orb all the way up to the Cosmic Noodle, otherwise known as the Eternum. Now don't get me wrong here, I'm not saying that the weapons of a Medieval are lackluster. In fact, they're pretty damn fun to use. Even at the low end, you've got the likes of the Azure Orb, which can fire homing rounds and stays surprisingly useful for a fair length of time. You've got the sword, which I can't ever remember the name of, which can do energy slashes at enemies from a distance. You've got the Voltride, a trident that shoots goddamn lightning, and if you overkill an enemy with it, it chains the lightning and makes other enemies explode into lightning and blood and death. You've got the Celestial Claw, which literally enables you to fire tiny planets directly into enemy faces. Tiny planets, including Earth, which I may have blown up several times at this point. You got the Star of Torment, which flat out allows you to pin your enemies to the wall when you kill them. And you've got the Eternum, which is essentially the BFG of a Medieval. You fire this thing into the middle of a room, it's pretty much gonna kill everything in there. Very good for large, unwieldy crowds. Now, on top of this, every weapon benefits from a soul mode effect. Soul mode is what happens when you collect enough souls from enemies that you have downed to fill the bar beneath your health. When that thing's full, you can activate it, and that will juice up your weapons. The Azure Orb practically becomes a flamethrower. The sword, a ricochet death machine. The Voltride, a continuous beam of amped up death. The Celestial Claw now fires stars which explode in a supernova on your enemies' faces. I'm particularly a fan of that one, if you couldn't tell. The Star of Torment throws homing shards at high speed, which will completely obliterate the room and redecorate it with the corpses of your enemies. And the Eternum generates black holes, which you can accidentally kill yourself with. So, pro tip, do not jump into the black hole. It's a very bad idea. Just let your enemies take the fall instead. So as you can see, the weapons are admittedly pretty damn cool. So what was my worry? Well, if you've got those weapons from pretty much the start, after several episodes worth of using them, they're gonna feel a little bit more familiar and maybe a bit old hat. Where Amid Evil deals with this potential hypothetical turns out to not really be existent in the long-term problem is with its enemy varieties. They're not just for show, they do actually change up the way in which you will fight them in certain circumstances. Probably one of the best examples of this would be during the course of the episode named Solar Solstice. You'll encounter enemies that are equipped with shields, and these shields enable them to not only block the projectiles that you shoot at them, but also reflect them right back at you. This can include the projectiles from the Azure Orb, from the sword, and from the Voltride as well, sending that beam of electricity directly back at you. Another enemy which surprised me during the course of a different episode was able to use the energy from my Voltride to transform itself into a more dangerous form, able to fling flaming projectiles at me, when before it was a simple up-close and personal melee type enemy. For other enemies, it may be a less overt thing. It may be a case that they're just plain easier to kill with one weapon versus another, but the point is, this smattering of enemies across the varied episodes of Amid Evil are there to keep you on your toes, to keep you switching up your weapons, and to ultimately use the right tool for the job. Another thing worth thinking about, however, when it comes to the enemies you'll be up against here in Amid Evil, is the fact that each episode is capped with a boss encounter. These are usually the ruler of that realm or something responsible for its downfall and corruption. And you know they're a big deal because they got their own health bar. You gotta take them seriously when they've got their own health bar. However, I've discovered that for the vast majority of these enemies, the Star of Torment pretty much shreds their faces off. 9 times out of 10. Accept no substitutes. When you absolutely positively have to kill the biggest thing in the room, a juiced up Star of Torment is your best friend. For me, personally, it rendered a lot of these boss encounters into fairly trivial experiences. I could just whip that thing out, turn on soul mode, and boom, there goes the health, right down to 0, and I just found it oddly deflating. I was expecting a little bit more resistance out of the majority of my bosses here, and even though I was playing on hard, I did find them to be just a little too easy to defeat. Maybe I should have been playing on evil, who knows, but I think it stands to reason that these bosses could be juiced up a bit more. I think they're all the more satisfying to bring down when you've got to figure them out. You've got to chip away at that health and earn that kill. When it comes to a sense of challenge outside of the bosses here, it really does depend what realm you're currently tackling, and outside of the first 2 realms and the final realm, you are actually free to choose which order you tackle these in, and that could, in some cases, lead to a point where you run up against a fairly significant difficulty spike, especially if you jump from the first 2 episodes to a realm, say like the Forge. Yeah, don't go to the Forge first. Go to practically any other realm but the Forge first, and you will have a better time in terms of that difficulty curve. And the reason why the Forge is as tough as it is because it is death trap laden, more so than any of the other realms, and also plays host to some really mean son of a gun enemies. I mean, don't even get me started on those spiky roller mines that sound like broken accordions, or the laser robots, or the guys that can fire harpoons and reel you in and then drop you into a damage pit. It's just full of douchebag enemies, but even then, I wouldn't say that I hate the Forge. I probably like it least in comparison to most of the other realms, but I still appreciate it. I still appreciate its look, I still appreciate its atmosphere, I appreciate the music, certainly. I just love the whole industrial vibe of the thing. It's really neat, but still a bastard of a realm to get through. And screw that spinny room in particular. Gives me nausea. In terms of the realms that I probably prefer the most, I'd say that Arcane Expanse probably tops the list. It is just a real looker of a realm from top to bottom. It's got some beautiful architecture, it's got some really nice music, and it's got some really cool enemies as well. It's largely you fighting evil wizards, and I just love the look of them, I love the style of them. They've even got like mounted cavalry. They pretty much ride around on crystal lions. How badass is that? I'd certainly be remiss though if I didn't mention a little bit about the Void, which is the final realm of Amid Evil. If you don't want to hear about it, if you'd rather experience it yourself, feel free to skip to the time code on screen, but it was the final realm released before full release of Amid Evil, so I feel a little obliged to give a bit of a spiel on how I thought it went, and it certainly fits as a big finale. It is wonderfully trippy, wonderfully weird, very abstract in terms of level design, in terms of geometry. I do kind of wish they would have gone a little crazier with it in terms of disorientating the player. For example, there's bits where the corridor kind of corkscrews, but the gravity remains the same. I thought it would have been really neat if the gravity would shift as you make your way down. It's spinning you alongside the corridor itself, but you never know. Maybe such a thing will pop up in Amid Evil too. I've got to give particular mention to the enemy designs during this section of Amid Evil as well. They fit the realm perfectly, and at the same time they feel completely and utterly alien. I honestly didn't know what to do the first time I encountered a giant shadowy crucifix with an eye in the middle shooting a laser beam. I honestly froze for a moment, just trying to figure out what exactly I should do. Should I attack the thing? Should I maybe admire it a little bit longer? Eventually I settled on attacking it as that laser beam was getting perilously close to my face, and thankfully that wasn't so much a dilemma with the other denizens of the Void. They're a lot more outwardly aggressive, a little bit more humanoid-ish looking in some cases as well, so you at least know what exactly it is you're potentially fighting against instead of some kind of abstract shape. But no less weird, no less unsettling and spooky, in my opinion. All in all, I'd say it was a good time spent in the incomprehensible void of cosmic damnation. So, all things considered, would I recommend Amid Evil? Absolutely yes. This has been a tremendous amount of fun, a joy even to play through from start to finish, and I'm actually quite eager to give it another go all over again on a harder difficulty, just to see if I can wring out even more satisfaction from its various realms. It's a fantastic example of the retro FPS revival, one that takes the essence of what made those classic FPS games so fun to play, games such as Hexen, Heretic, Quake, and beyond, and bring them into a more modern light and sand down maybe some of those rougher edges, the ones that, you tend to forget about when you're viewing them through rose-tinted glasses. But yes, this is absolutely something you should check out if you're a fan of retro FPSs in general, having fun in general. It's certainly going to be yet another feather in the cap of the New Bloods. Dusk was great, this is great. I'm just hoping they can keep the streak going. More stuff like this, please. Icarus would like it injected directly into his veins. In any case, I hope you found this video insightful. At the very least, I hope you found it entertaining. And if you somehow feel compelled to help me out and support the channel, you'll be intrigued to know that I do in fact have a Patreon page. What a coincidence! There's a bunch of them scrolling up the screen right now. Wonderful people, wonderful. If you're interested in joining their esteemed ranks, you'll be happy to know that I offer tiers on my Patreon page that will enable you to be featured in the credits, or if you're feeling a little bit flush, you can also gain access to early editions of my videos before anyone else. If you find yourself interested, the link to my Patreon page can be found in the description below. But until next time, this has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.